El-Rufai. I didn't like that round of applause. That's better. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Are we settling down? Please settle down. Yes. Welcome to this book chat that I'm hosting. Yes. First, I want to say a big thanks to Lola. She's acting like she doesn't deserve the thanks, but some years ago, I crowed so much about Jennifer Makumbi and Chintu that Lola brought her to Ake so that I would have a book chat with her. And then, really, honestly, and I'm not saying this because I'm sitting here hosting they're talking about their books, but I think these two women have written some very fine books, and I have questions, I have accusations, and but all around, we are going to have a lot of fun. I want a show of hands. How many people have read Stay With Me? Okay. And the author herself. And how many people have read An Abundance of Scorpons? Okay. Well, by this time next year, all of you have read the books. I'm going to try and not give away anything in our discussion. So the first thing we are going to do is each author is going to read a short passage from their book, and I'll start on my left with Madame.
For those that have the book, I'm going to read from page 26. One afternoon in late October, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, wondering where else to apply for work, when I had a knock on my door. The scent of cologne preceded Suleiman as he swaggered in, clad in a shadda babariga so starched that it rustled as he walked. He was alone, which was strange. The few times he'd come to my room in the past, his wife Mariam had accompanied him. What my brother-in-law did next was even stranger. He sat so close to me that his thigh touched mine. The smell of stale beer and cheap cologne assaulted my nose. I stood up and sat on the stool by my dressing table. An awkward silence ensued. Just as I was about to ask him if there was something wrong, he spoke. "I'm happy you've decided to stay with us," he said. "Baba is most generous," I replied. "We can make it permanent, you know." Suleiman's face carried a strange expression. "What do you mean?" "Mariam likes you, and she's not the jealous type," he said, and then he winked at me. "Her father also has 2 wives. That was when I realized that this was, in fact, a marriage proposal. My brother-in-law was a world-class fool. Did he honestly believe that because his wife's father was a polygamist, she would not have any qualms about him taking a second wife? Although it was not unusual for a man to marry his brother's widow, the proposal was shocking. So, Suleiman believed he was qualified to replace Yakubu. An involuntary laugh escaped my throat. Suleiman snapped his head up and looked at me, his expression now hostile. "You think I'm not good enough for you? Is that it?" he sneered. His voice grated in my ears like sand in boiled rice. "Actually, you're not." He stiffened his shoulders. "What did you say?" "You're not half the man my husband was," I said, enunciating each word slowly.
Good afternoon. I'm reading from the beginning of the book, so I'm on page 10. Although sleep stays away, every night I shut my eyes, and pieces of the life I left behind come back to me. I see the batik pillowcases in our bedroom, our neighbors and your family, which, for a misguided period, I thought was also mine. I see you. Tonight, I see the bedside lamp you gave me a few weeks after we got married. I could not sleep in the dark, and you had nightmares if we left the fluorescent lights on. That lamp was your solution. You bought it without telling me you'd come up with a compromise, without asking me if I wanted a lamp. And as I stroked its bronze base and admired the tinted glass panels that formed its shade, you asked me what I would take out of the building if our house was burning. I didn't think about it before saying, our baby, even though we did not have children yet. Something, you said, not someone. But you seemed a little hurt that when I thought it was someone, I did not consider rescuing you.
Thank you. So, both of your books, your book begins, there's a short passage where the, what's her name again, Tabaya, has difficulty having children. And your book, of course, that's one of the central themes. So I wanted to ask, though I appreciate you picking the themes, why you picked the theme, that particular theme that you did, Madame first?
Well, basically about the difficulty in having children, because I wanted the protagonist, that's Tambaya, because I knew even in the beginning when I was writing that she's going to end up as the matron in an orphanage. So I wanted to portray the fact that you can be a mother without necessarily being a biological mother. So that it was like she now has children, they are her children, and the orphans, of course, are children that don't have parents, and she now becomes like a surrogate mother to them, so there was like a symbiotic relationship. So deliberately, I made her a childless woman because I want her to end up with having children that are not biologically her own, because I don't believe that you necessarily have to give birth biologically to have children.
I want to do a follow-up question. So then, how did you think that her being in that role, was that part of her grieving process? Did that help her with her grief?
Finally, yes, certainly,
okay.
certainly.
So you thought that was
yes, I thought about that, because finally she came to accept the fact that she could not have her own children, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, you can love other people's children.
Okay. You?
Yeah, so in many ways, the story for me began much later in the book, where the child already existed. The first scene that I visualized was one where she had a sick child in the hospital. So I sort of always knew she was going to have children. And it was really about the complicated feeling of a mother who has a sick child and she herself is feeling overwhelmed, and how we interpret that when we encounter it. So I then went back a bit and thought about, oh, who is she before she has these children? And all of these things started coming, like, okay, this is a child that she also waited for a while. She didn't have children for some time. But I think that on a general note, it kind of came from what I picked up growing up in terms of what we say about women and children and what is expected. And I think I just became interested in that question very early on.
So both of your characters have very few family connections themselves. And I won't lie, I thought for you especially, I thought, my goodness, you know, all the things that she goes through. And then on top of it, she has practically no one. So why did you do that?
I think that for a character, it was necessary for her to sort of be all alone. And I say this to people who have read the book. I say, if a mother-in-law had been a mother, this would be a very different novel. And the fact that she's sort of isolated from an extended family connection, which is very important for her. I think it's such an integral part of her character and why she makes some of the choices and decisions that she makes, because this is something she sort of yearned for, and I think that's why that sort of also heightens the effects of the event on her as a person.
Madam? Why?
Well, my answer is going to be sort of like similar to what she said. It was deliberate. I did that deliberately because I wanted my character to be all alone in the world, because part of what I wanted to portray is the question of us relying on ourselves, being self-reliant. So I wanted the protagonist to be a woman that is all alone in the world, who realizes that she has to get up and fend for herself, take her destiny in her own hands. That's why I deliberately made her a woman with very little family connections.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the trauma in the book and writing of tragedy. In her book, if you haven't read it, there's a car accident. I'm not letting anything out of the bag. It happens, I think, in the first 10 pages. Okay. Now, you write it, it's kind of shocking because it's like they are just on this road having, I think they approach a toll booth, and all of a sudden, bang, and then we go off screen, right? So you don't go deep into the telling of, even in the aftermath, after she hears the screeching cars, maybe people coming to pick them up anyway, let's assume she blacked out. You, on the other hand, you write the trauma, there's like repeated trauma, repeated deaths. So I want to discuss a little bit about why you chose to move a lot of the action off screen and why you put it so much on screen, yeah.
Yes. I thought something so huge and so monumental, and I think something so huge, I don't think we'll want to play it over and over with all the little details. And another consideration is, for something so traumatic like that, I assume that she must have blacked out and she couldn't remember most of what happened after that. That's why I didn't bother to write about who came to save them, how they were taken to hospital. So after that happened, then I just cut to the hospital scene.
Okay.
So with this novel, I feel that, it's a conversation, and it's a kind of reckoning because it begins at the end. And because of that, I think that they can look at some things because there's a bit of distance, and which is why it was very clear to me that it had to begin at the end. So in a sense, this is something they are saying to the reader and sort of saying to each other, and there's a bit of space. I don't think that it would be as intense if it was in real time as they're going through it. So what they're doing also is sort of processing all of this and trying to build a narrative, each one of them, to further whatever hand they think that is going to come out of the novel. And that each character sort of deals with situations differently, deals with grief differently, and that there's no 4 steps when things like this happen.
Okay. And I just want to say that they both do grief differently, the telling of the trauma, but it works perfectly in each novel. I want to do separate questions, and the first one is for... so in Stay With Me, you alternate the point of views. Okay, so I'm going to start with my accusation so you know where I'm coming from. I feel like the writer connives and leads us in the direction, well, me anyway, so that I have to somehow give the benefit of the doubt to Akin, the husband, or like narrators. So I did this thing with your novel where I read it as you wrote it. Then I read it a second time, just Yejedi's parts, and then I read it just Akin's parts, and I came to the conclusion, I love the book. But then why didn't you just write it as an unreliable narration on Akin's part until the truth comes out? Why do you feel the need that I should like him also?
You've said this to me before, so I saw that coming. The first thing is that I don't expect you to like him, but I want you to understand him. What you make of him then is up to you. And why didn't I write it that way? The truth is I actually did. I did that for like 3 years.
Yes.
And I realized that by the time you get to him, you don't care. But you're just like, okay, bye. I'm not interested in whatever he has to say for himself. So that was definitely a deliberate choice, that I realized that if I was going to have both characters in the book, and I wanted how he's that it doesn't get out of. And I wanted to see that from his point of view. So that's when I sort of started splitting the chapters. Okay. And in terms of his own narrative, I think it's even more about what he refuses to say that tells us more about him than what he actually says. So, yeah, initially I did that, and I thought to myself, I'm really interested in characters. Monsters are not very interesting to me. I don't care if you like him, but I hope that I've done enough of a job for you to sort of see where he's coming from. Not necessarily agree with it, but say, oh, okay, this is who he is.
Okay, I don't know. Because she's a very good writer, so even though she says, I didn't mean for you to like him, blah, 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 that's exactly what she did, you see. Okay. Madam, I want to talk about your character. I appreciated the fact that towards the end, there was about here, but in Ghana, widows are long-suffering, and, you know, the men get remarried pretty quickly. But did you, because that to me read as a subversive act, you see, because traditionally, we would expect her to remain unwanting of love, or not even, but you wrote it differently. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I agree with you culturally. You know, like when a man loses his wife, he can marry the next week. And people will like the character to be that way. I wanted to show that, well, people die, but life goes on. And we women also, we have a life. Even though your husband is dead, I mean, she grieved. She loved her husband, she grieved, but she had to move on. That was why I wanted the book to sort of end on a hopeful, happy note, because you know that this woman is going to go on living her life fully. Yes.
Did you, you know, okay, maybe out. The route she takes, all the travels and trying to find her way, I took it as a journey. All of that was a journey into her grief, but also dealing with her grief. And I'm going to be personal. Did your own grief take that kind of course? Does it inform how you wrote, how she recovered? Or how, not recovery, but how she dealt with it? I don't know.
That's a question that I keep getting asked. And I sometimes wonder if I didn't have, probably if I didn't have the losses I had in my life, it would have been a different novel, probably. I don't know, yeah. So I sometimes wonder about that. But I guess there's no way I can say that what I've been through did not affect my writing. So I believe that it did, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to take something from her book and bring it to yours. Why don't they ever consider adoption?
Because I didn't want them to win.
She's very manipulative.
I'll just be honest about that. Because then we don't really have a novel.
Okay.
You know. But the other thing is also that I grew up with people around me, like friends of my parents who didn't have children. And I was privy to some extent to some of the conversations around whether adoption was an option. And from what I remember, it was there was this strange reluctance towards it. And it's only until recently, someone of my mother's generation just adopted a child like 5 years ago. And it was something that even the people that I think did it hid the fact that they had adopted a child. It was, someone would travel and then come back with a baby. And there was all of that complication around it, And I think that even in An Abundance of Scorpion, it acknowledges that, people have all of this hang-ups about what is a viable option,
Okay. I'll stay with you again.
You stay with me.
I have lots of accusations. My next one is that the second wife, she comes in just as an agent of change. I mean, not you. Something happens to her and then you just drop her like a hot potato and then the thing moves on. I don't want to give it away.
Yep.
Why?
Well, I mean, when I talk about this book, sometimes there are characters that are very interesting to me, and that I'm interested in what happens to them, and she's one of them. At a point when I was working on it, I wrote like a short story from a perspective, and why she comes into this, why she makes this decision, why this is a choice that she makes. And in terms of the resolution of what becomes of her, I wanted it to be that way, because I think that there's a lot that remains unspoken in terms of what happens to women in these communities. Okay. And one of the ways I think about this book is as a mirror, and that's what I hope it does, that some of the things that we inflict on women is so outrageous that I sometimes wonder, maybe we just don't understand that this is what we're doing to people. This is what we're doing to people psychologically. This is how we're breaking down a human being. And one of the things I thought about in this, and which is why, as you said, I wanted to sort of look at the trauma very carefully. I didn't want to look away from it, is that I hoped to compel people who come from maybe this culture, this part of the world of Nigeria, to say, this is what you do. Okay. For you.
I want to talk a bit about religion. In fact, we were having a conversation, another writer, at lunch, and talking about interrogating religion. So your characters are religious, but your central character and her friend, Esther, they have dialogues where they interrogate organized religion and its impact on society. I want you to talk a little bit about that. Does it reflect your own views? Do you wish we were more interrogative?
Yes, certainly. I think some of the questions that were raised in the book, I think they are questions we need to talk about. There's no point shying away from certain things that are so fundamental to our lives. I believe we need to talk about religion and how religion shapes our views and also the way we interact with each other. I believe, I can say to some extent it reflects my views, yes, because I believe personally that everybody's religion is private. I believe in freedom. I think all of us should have the freedom to do exactly what we wish to do. I believe that the only thing that should limit a person's freedom is when something he does affects adversely the next person. Barring that, I believe we should all have the freedom to do what we want to do. And religion, I believe, should be private. I believe religion should be taken out of our public systems, government systems, school systems. What I'm saying might be controversial, but that's my view. I don't think if we do that, it will stop anybody from practicing his religion the way he sees fit. One other thing is in Nigeria, the Muslims and the Christians, we tend to think that we are the only ones. There are people that don't believe in either of the two religions. There are people that believe in traditional African religions. I think they have as much right as anybody else to practice what they believe in, as long as they do not infringe on the next person's rights. That's my belief.
Good. From religion to sex, yay.
Kinna.
So in old African literature, you know, they don't have sex, but they have kids. I don't know. I don't know where the babies come from. But lately, yes, we are seeing a lot more sex. And in your book, there is that really lovely steamy scene between. It's good.
It's not that steamy.
It's not that steamy. Between the husband and the wife. And of course, in your book, there are all sorts of realizations going on there. What I want to talk about is that what inspired you? Like, if you're not seeing something written in African literature, I want to talk about how you felt. Did you want to tell the truth? Did you want to talk about that part of women's lives? What brought that on?
Well, because I think as writers, we have to be honest. We have to be courageous.
Yes,
I mean, you should not censor yourself. If a story calls for something to be said, I think you should not be afraid to say it. If there's sex between a man and his wife, you write it if you feel there's a reason. And the reason why I wrote that is because I wanted to show how close, how loving the relationship is, so that when what happened later happens, you know, people will feel it more because they understand her loss. Yeah. So there's no point shying about. You can't just plug in sex scenes here and there just for the sake of that. But if you have a reason for it to be there, I don't think you should shy away from writing. I think if you want to be a writer, you have to be prepared to be courageous, and also you have to know that not everybody will agree with you. You have to be ready to accept criticism, even abuse from some quarters, but frankly, I think we shouldn't really care. If you want to say something, just
came up. Yes. And on the odd seat at that time was Abubakar. And I think that, and I speak to myself, we have all these expectations which should not be, and hang-ups. And to be honest, when I was reading An Abundance of Scorpions, when I got there, I literally closed it. I wasn't expecting. I was like, wow. And which is on me, you know, it's really on me. Like, so you come with all this preconceived notion, like, oh, it's going to be, you know, this kind of book. And I honestly closed it and said, okay, I'm going to come back and read this later. But to talk about this book, I don't think that I could have written it, given what it's about, without going into that. And I feel like as a writer, for me as a writer, I'm very curious about the human experience. And that's part of the human experience. It's really not, it's not even, I don't know, it's just writing to me.
I brought it up because I think, and I agree with you, Madam, because it makes, in the ways each of you treat sex, the act itself, the telling of it, makes such sense and really brings the stories together in some way. We feel her loss. We understand what her issues are. So thank you about that. I want to ask one more set of questions, and then we'll throw it to the floor. So first of all, I want to really thank both of you for dealing with issues of infertility. I think that the way in which we treat African, in our communities, how we treat women, freedom really would be for an African woman to say, you know what, I don't want to have children ever. And the society doesn't go, oh, whatever. So thank you for that. I read a review, I think it was in The Guardian, and it was written by Diane Evans, and where she talks about, you know, the scene where she goes up Mountain of something miracles. It was, what was it called? And if you follow, and I read a lot bringing this up, and if you read it, like in Malera Wood's Indigo, terrible suffering will propel the woman to go somewhere. When I started reading the book, I knew that scene was coming. In Diane Evans's review, she said it was like funny and ridiculous. But I thought that, honestly, you wrote it very well. because it's hard to write somebody at their lowest, and she was at her lowest, and be compassionate, and because every step she took, my heart was beating. I was like, even when she got up there, she was holding the goat. It was just too much to bear. So I want to talk about how you found the courage to write that, and really what made you write it in such a transparent, compassionate way.
So I'm going to say something about that scene. It was the most difficult part of the book to write. It was, the book changed so much in the time it took to write it, but it was one scene that was right there from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And every time I edited it, I wanted to take it out. Because, come on. And every time I felt this compulsion, like, it was almost as if, this is what happened, and I have to say it. Mm-hmm. This is exactly what happened, and I just have to say it the way it is. But something very interesting started happening when the book came out last year, and this still happened the last event in Lagos in December, I think, was that people would come up to me, and more than one person has said it, and would say, in Lagos was a gentleman who said, I read this book, then I gave it to my mother, and, she read it, and we had this long conversation that we'd never had before. And my mother told me, before I had you, I think he's the only son, I had to do all these things, and I went to these places, and, I look back now, and I think, what was going on. And I've had that like 2 or 3 times, and no, this is bizarre, but I remember that December, it was like the 3rd time I was hearing it, and I thought to myself when that gentleman was speaking to me, it was all those women. Yeah. Now, this is bizarre, you don't have to believe it. Mm-hmm. I know it sounds kooky, but I felt like, because this scene, it was right from the beginning, it was there, and I don't know, it sounds grandiose, but
no,
it was testifying to something.
Yeah, thank you. Questions? Wow. Well, I'm seeing only men. Women.
You made mention of making a change to your book 3 years in. So I wanted to find out, how long did it take you to finish the book, and what prompts you to revise certain key aspects of your...
It just wasn't good enough every single time. The first time the first draft I knew it was mostly rubbish. So the second draft was a given. But the thing was that I would leave it, go away, and then come back and see something I hadn't seen before. And for a very long time, the structure was an issue. It took a while to figure out the structure. It took a while to figure out the perspective, the voice that would be most faithful to this particular story. And so I kept going at it and trying different things. So there was a time I wrote it in 3rd person. It was really the telling. The story itself, I think, was mostly there. It was how it would be told.
Hold on. When did you know you were a writer?
Wow.
I'm coming.
Who is a writer?
Well, don't ask the question back.
Yeah, like I tell people, when you write, you're a writer. If you write anything, you're a writer. So I don't know. I guess, once you write, the moment I start writing, I think I can claim that I'm a writer, but I know that there's something about being published that sort of validates one. And then after that, you feel free to say you are a writer. Because in the beginning, I couldn't bring myself to say I'm a writer, but now on my Twitter page, the first thing you see there is writer. Why? I guess it's because I've been published. So there's something about being published, but I always tell young people that you don't have to be published to call yourself a writer. Once you are writing, you haven't been published, it just means that you haven't been lucky enough, the right agent or publisher hasn't seen your work, because some of this talent, there's luck, there are so many things that come into play. But I guess I'll say I proudly call myself a writer now because I've been published by Lola.
Good. That's one over there, and then...
Good afternoon. And there was an interview with Deborah Eisenberg where she said, writing in the first person is easier. And so which is why most times when you see first novels written by writers like Chimamanda are written in the first person. And then when they graduated, they started writing in a omniscient point of view. So did you choose the first person because it was like a leeway for you, and because of it's unreliable, it's not as difficult as...
Yes. Thank you very much for that question, because it's interesting the point of view one chooses to tell a story. Actually,
Madam, excuse me. You people are talking too much amongst yourselves now. Thank you very much.
I practically wrote the whole of my novel in the third person, at first. But there was something missing. And the moment I changed it to first person, let me tell you, changing to first person from third, I think the first person narration brings us really close to the character. It depends on how close you want to be to the point of view of the character. And I wanted this story to be told from her perspective. And of course, I had written it in the third person, but the moment I started changing to the first person, everything started working better, honestly. But the novel I'm working on now, I'm writing in the third person because it depends on what you want to do. If you want to show different points of view, or you don't want to be that close to a character because there's some distance. There's a story you can tell with some distance, and there's a story you can tell very, very close. So you have to choose. As to whether the first person narration writing is easier, I really don't know. But maybe we could say that because maybe statistics shows that first-time writers writing the first person probably is easier. I don't know. Yeah.
So with this novel, it wasn't because it was easier. It was because, each story you have to figure out the way it's told, like what is going to work for this particular story that I'm telling. And with this one, it was the first person. Like I said earlier, I tried a number of other perspectives. And to go back to, that mountain scene, I could not have written it from the third person. It had to be from our point of view.
Good afternoon. My comment is for abundance of scorpions. It took me 7 hours to read that book, from 9 a.m. to 3 a.m. So my children had to remind me that I have to pray in between. I find the story so interesting, and I want some enlightenment and clarification. The characters of Esther and Aminu. We have a Christian Esther and a Muslim Aminu. And there is a very good relationship there, a very happy marriage. And that set me thinking. That's a topic for the interfaith dialogue. We always shy away from this. Love is something you cannot control. Today I am a Muslim Zainab, and I would want to marry a Christian Michael, and there's a problem. But if you are a Muslim Aminu, and you are marrying a Christian Esther, it's possible. Now, I think we have an issue there. An issue that probably if you talk too much about it, they will put fatwa on your head. So maybe the Muslims among us, the scholars among us may want to throw light on why a Muslim Aminu can marry a Christian Esther, but a Muslim Zainab cannot marry a Christian Michael.
Yeah,
I know this is a dangerous topic, but well, we are scholars, so
Lola, I want you to reaffirm to us that this is a safe space.
This is a safe space.
Repeat.
Join me now.
Good. So everybody feel free, yes.
Okay. So that you enlighten people.
Yes.
Maybe there is a definite reason for that. We have to move forward.
I don't know. It seems a lot of things have changed in Nigeria. I don't want to speak because I'm not learned enough. But what I know, I'm not speaking from the religious aspect. I'm just speaking from what I know. You know, once upon a time, Muslim women married Christian men. I can cite examples. Mariam Babangida's mother, a Muslim, married a Christian Igbo man. And they had like 6 children or so. How many children did they have?
When you say once upon a time, what time?
I would say maybe in the 50s, 60s. In the 50s, 60s. Mary Teresa. Not even her. Hassan Usman. Father. Yes. Yes. Hassan Usman's father. You know, Hassan Usman, anyway, it's just, okay, let me say it in the way you'll understand. You know Ike Nwachukwu? Yes. Ike Nwachukwu? Soldier, yeah. Yes. His mother is from Katsina and a Muslim, and his father is Igbo. And they married, they had children. So I don't know how it used to be done in those days. There are so many examples I can cite, but it's going to be a lot of problems. But I can't explain it because I'm not an Islamic scholar. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's there in the Quran. That one thing I know, though, is, you know, we women, we are always sort of cheated because the men interpret these things. So they interpret it to their advantage. But a woman must only marry a Muslim. That's, you know, so, but I don't know, you know, I don't want to talk about something I'm not learned in, but that's the facts. And I think it's very good that Prof brought it up. It's an interesting topic, really. Yeah.
Please, I'll be asking 3 questions. I'm very sorry, please.
What are you doing?
I'll be asking 3 questions.
No,
please.
you'll be asking one.
I'm sorry.
No,
I had to skip a
no,
creative
or you will
writing
sit down
class.
right now. One question. Yes, you can meet them later. One question. You
Okay.
can't apologize. Don't apologize for something you shouldn't be doing. Just don't do it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
One question.
Okay, I'll choose the first one then. You were having the banking job while you were writing. I think I got that from some of the interviews, right? You were with the frustration of you wanting to create and having to share your space and time with all other things.
I don't think I did my job as well as I could have. So, which is why I had to leave it eventually. But the thing was basically that I didn't have a social life. That was probably not even because of the book, but other reasons. But it was just that every time that I had to be for the book. I didn't do much in those years other than work on the book and go to work because I still had to pay my bills. And I remember then I wouldn't go out for lunch. I would stay in the office and work if I could, you know, if I was in the headspace to do it. I would also try to wake up in the morning when it was possible and work before I had to go out. So it was basically like stealing every moment. It was literally every moment I could find, whether I was sitting on a bus. I mean, it was just trying to do it at, if I had a 6-minute window, I could, you know, work on a sentence or something. So it was taking every single moment and very little socializing, yeah.
Hi, Ayobami. That book made me cry. Just want to say thank you so much for writing about a topic that nobody wants to talk about. Just to throw more light on what our dear mother said about how come Muslim women can't marry men who aren't Muslim. I think the background to that is when Islam started, it was a bit like a clannish thing. They were the minority. And it's premised on this belief that if you allow your women errands, because it's very easy, in quotes, to make your woman adhere to the religion that you profess, So I think that rule used to apply then, but now maybe because we are 2 billion Muslims, it kind of seems odd. We're a lot. And losing one person would be, no one would notice. But I think it's also very explained in the Quran. I don't know the exact verse, but I do know that it's about, because the women have the children, and the religious training, the formative years starts when you are training your child from like 3 years. Zomi, Salah, Muna Azimi, that sort of thing. No, that's what I'm saying. The Islamic establishment would not want a Muslim woman to be married to a Jew because they wouldn't want the children to be trained in that way. Okay.
You know, I think that argument you're making, the fact that it's the women, okay, so that the children, if you want them to be Muslims, because most probably they will follow their mother's faith.
Most likely.
Yes.
So I was getting there to say that even that rule of allowing Muslim men who train children who are only Muslim in name but are Jewish in this thing. I like the fact that this conversation is happening, but I just thought I should throw that light that it seems a woman is a bit weaker and softer, so it's easier for a man to influence her adherence to a religion. Thank you.
I want to add that the anxiety, all cultures and religions have this anxiety about, because they actually, women, not only must we give birth to perpetuate the race, we must also be the ones to train in the culture.
Well, you know, Kinna, the problem generally is that there's a which word do I use now? It's so enforced, this need to police women.
Yes.
And these roles that we have been given, just like what we were talking about earlier, you cannot decide, for instance, as a woman to say, hey, I don't want kids. Exactly. I don't want to be a mother. Yes. There's a loud hatred for a woman who will make that choice. Yes. And it unfortunately also applies in the religious space. Yes. So if I'm born Muslim, for instance, there is no acceptance of my, maybe criticism of my faith, or for me to say, look, I don't want to be Muslim, or I don't even believe in God, for instance. Yes. I do, just so we're clear. I'm a Muslim. But there's a societal need that they protect. It's like, how dare you, as a woman, refuse to follow that law. For instance, if I'm a Muslim woman, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm a feminist, so anytime we talk about this, I'll let the women go on, but I'm going to cut her short.
I finished, thank you.
Hey, TJ back there.
Sorry, I'm no mansplaining. I'm going to, but I'm taking it from the conversation though. My question is for Ayobami. I wanted to ask, your work has been translated into other languages. I wanted to ask about your experience with control, creative control over your work being published in other regions, other languages. Do you feel I know maybe you don't speak all those languages, but as an author, how much control do you feel you have over how your story is told or presented to other regions? Thank you.
So there's this thing I think that I believe, but when you write a book, you realize that, your belief is a bit different. Because I was a literature major, I feel like a novel, once it gets published, it becomes something else. Like, I have my own interpretation of it, I have my own understanding of it, but it's going to be a collaborative effort between me and whoever reads it, and they're going to have extrapolations that I didn't even expect. But I don't think that quite hit home until I saw the first translation of the book, and I looked at it and could not understand anything, and that's when I thought, oh, this book is really no longer mine. It belongs to everybody now. So in terms of creative control, I talk to the translators sometimes, but I just have to trust them because I don't speak those languages, so that's what it boils down to.
My mother just got the Chinese. What my mother does is that we give it to the embassy. So we just got the Chinese translation of, I think, our sister Killjoy, and we donated it to the Chinese embassy. So somebody will read it, they come back and say, we like the story, then we think that it is okay. There is a young woman.
Thank you very much. Ayobami, I just want to say I really loved your book. But then I have a question. It's concerning loss. Yes, we know that death is a part of life. So, and the way you explored her loss in the book, both experience grief yourself to be able to write it in depth, is that something, or it just comes out naturally?
Okay. Experiences I've not had. So writing is sometimes my way of understanding the world. So I want to imagine myself into a certain space, like what is it like to lose this person in your life? So there's a bit of that I had to imagine, okay, what is it like to outlive a child? What do I think she's going to think, and sort of try to walk in her shoes. The other part is that, unfortunately, loss was something I became familiar with early on in life because, we lost someone in my family. So it was something that I spent a lot of time thinking about growing up, so which, of course, shows up in the book also.
Who else? Oh, here. Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Solomon. In the course of this session, I learned that the two speakers did creative writing courses. My question is, you can teach someone how to write?
Wow. I don't know about that, but I know that you can help someone enhance his writing skills. Because we're all different. There are some people that are very, very smart in mathematics. You give them an equation, they just solve it. That's why, before you go get admitted into a writing school, they want to see your writing sample, just to have an idea whether you have that aptitude. We can't all be good in everything, but once you have that aptitude, definitely writing schools enhance a person's writing. I know that it has enhanced mine, definitely, because what happened in my own case was I just said, I want to write, and I started. But I was sensitive enough to know that my writing was not good enough. And I knew that I had to learn the craft. There are certain things you need to learn that will enhance your writing. These days, there are so many creative writing schools, but these things are not black and white, because we've had great writers many, many years ago when there were no writing schools, so it must have been something they had within them. And it really amazes me how somebody can write something like War and Peace without a computer, a word processor. You're a writer, you know how you have to edit. Then they did all that by hand, cross out, rewrite. So it's really incredible what they did. So there are people that have the gift, there are people that have the aptitude that will really gain from creative writing classes. So I think in a way you can say yes, you can teach somebody to be a better writer.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. What's an adverb? What is it doing in this sentence? That's not necessarily a conversation most people are interested in. But as a writer, you're interested in those things, so you meet people like that. On the other hand, I really don't think it's absolutely necessary for you to do it. There are other avenues to sort of do that and improve yourself. But it's really a great time to focus primarily on your writing.
In Ghana, we say our husband has arrived. Welcome, Your Excellency. I wanted to ask a question. As a woman of Northern Nigeria, did you feel you needed to present a certain story did you feel like you needed to present a certain womanhood? Because I want to say that's not what I got. I think you wrote a very universal story. It could easily have been a woman from northern Ghana. But were you conscious of when you were crafting her and her utterances, her experiences, how she dealt with things? Were you conscious? Did you?
Not really. I guess, they say you write what you know. So, and the environment I wrote in, the setting, the culture, is my own culture. So I think it must have just come naturally for me to write about those things, to talk about issues that are important to us here. But one of the key motivations for me was that I was conscious of the fact that most of the literature that came out of Nigeria is from the perspective of southern Nigeria. Because we have very vibrant literature, stories that people read all over the world. So mostly, people that get to know cultures from fiction will just probably think of the Nigerian culture as the Igbo culture, which is completely different from the northern culture. So I think that's why I encourage people to write, especially young people from this, to suit their purposes. So we need to write our own stories and get them out there. That's the argument I always make when we're talking about writing in indigenous languages. In our writers writing in the English language, because you don't like the word global. So which one will I use now? Because it's a story known all over the world.
Again, both your novels, they want, and again, the women reassert themselves. It can go on for a while, but they reassert themselves. So in a lot of ways, these are feminist narratives. I want you to talk a little bit about, not particularly about feminism, but whether the idea that women can be so easily manipulated as the men think we can, or that we are just pieces on a board to be moved, bears out in reality, or we are made to think that that's how we are to be.
Of course, I don't think women can be easily manipulated. I think that the manipulation that takes place is supported by a whole system. It's because there's a system behind it. I think that, in relation to this book, that reassertion takes place. I think that also the remarkable story is that people manage to assert themselves in spite of these systems that are in place, which should tell us that if people manage to surmount this kind of obstacles, whatever narrative we had, that all these people who can be easy.
When we are growing up, we are sort of like guided to play certain roles. There are certain ways you're supposed to behave if you're going to be a good girl. Maybe you get tired or whatever and you decide, what the hell, I'm going to speak up for myself. A lot of this is happening, although there are still a lot of our women that are still sort of suppressed. I think there are certain women like that, but we need a critical mass of such women. Women in Nigeria are we. Most of the women in Nigeria are suppressed. They can't talk, they can't do anything unless their husbands or brothers give them permission. And I don't know what actually our members against women. Well, I guess because we don't have a critical mass of women there. But our men should also have that interest in mind. Our lawmakers, that's why they're called lawmakers. Laws that are outdated, they should jettison them. Certain laws that they say you can't get passport unless your husband signs, or you can't do this.
Again, both your characters flee the scenes of their trauma on a journey of the self-discovery. Her character is allowed some kind of discovery of love, other love interest. You, on the other hand, it's like you are channeling your inner soul on a letter. She leaves, she goes away, and then it's still a possibility.
I think what was important to me at the end was that she would be alone. and that for me was a journey, was that this was a character. I'm alone, and that's where she is when she comes back.
Questions? Back? Yes.
It's more of a comment, not a question. I think both men, the husband of Tambaya and Yemi, is that her name, your character? Yeji. Because if they were, most of the trouble they had to go through, they never would have gone through the troubles. Like for Tambaya's husband, who had to take loans in order for the wife to have fertility tests, if he had just had an honest conversation with her, that, look, this is my resources and we really can't afford this. Why can't we just live with one child? What's wrong with that? That kind of support would have been, would have been better for the family. And for Yejide's husband, for her to... So I think men should have a rethink. They have to be honest with their wives. That's the message, I believe. Yeah.
What I wanted to say to that is, I agree with you. That is the point, that having a more equitable society, having more equitable personal relations, caught up in all of this dishonesty and having to portray yourself as what you're not. If you can't be vulnerable in what is supposed to be the most intimate relationship in your life, because I'm a man, therefore, whatever, then you're in jail yourself. That's what I think.
I tried to write we know men are driven by their egos. So that's what informed his decision. He loved his wife. He didn't want to disappoint her. He felt it was better for him to borrow money to satisfy her. And of course, that way, his ego is intact.
My name is Farina again. I once asked this of Hadiza. Now, did the two of you connive with the endings of your stories? Or are you planning sequels? Please come clean.
Okay. When I got to the ending, people often say to me, so what?
There will be, but what do you think happened? Think about it.
Yes, over there.
So my question is for you, Ayobami. I wanted to know if there was a part where you were writing the book where you came to this sort of consciousness, and if that is what influenced the fact that Yejide just, she fled from the scene and said...
Before, and I expect some people would figure it out. If you didn't, you need to ask yourself why. Why...
On the scene of so I think it's good. I've come to the end. I first of all, beginnings. So thank you for attending book chat.
Next book chat.